Chris, how was my karate thing? Was that bad? Was that too bad? I took one karate class when I was 5, so
did you really?
Never touched it. Oh yeah, one class, never went back.
Okay,
Never ever went back. I was that kid that when I was little, if my mom took me to a sports, there was a high chance that I would be done with it in a week. I hated sports when I was a kid. Hated them.
Oh man. Well, it's not really a sport, is it?
You're right, but there are sportsmanship aspects involved with it.
It's a martial art.
Ooh. So would you call it an art form?
Not to be all Joe. Oh, of course, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not to be all jokey.
Not to be too Joe Rogan on you, but it is a martial art.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing. If there's one thing I've learned about Joe Rogan, it's that don't take things too seriously and never ever insult try to go at him when it comes to martial arts or weed. Or weed. Don't forget that. That's the other essential with him.
That too. Oh man.
Martial arts. But Chris, how you doing, man?
Dude, I'm doing good, man. How about yourself?
We've been dealing with some big things, obviously, in our personal lives as well as the podcast. We were just on the Guy at the Film Festival this past weekend. Had a lot of fun there. Had a lot of unexpected things come up, but we still had a blast watching Mortal Kombat. Good God, there are things in that movie that I will never forget. I started a new job. You're back at school. We're busy.
It's true.
We're busy. Hence, the hustle never stops.
All the calculators right down there.
Oh, I didn't even notice.
How many
calculators? Is that 4 calculators?
That's 4. I got to figure out which ones work and which ones don't.
Why do you have so many? Oh, my God.
Hey, man. Failure to plan is planning to fail.
You're right, but, I mean, I can usually suffice with one, but, I mean, to each his own. But, Chris, so remember how... I'm trying to think of another recent example of something that I tried. Oh, so remember how last year I kept pushing you and telling you, I'm like, dude, you got to do this. You got to do this. You got to do Watchmen. And then I did the same thing with you with rewatching Community. You know how I did that?
I do, yeah. I'm glad you did.
Well, the good news is that you finally got me back. But I'll tell you why.
If that's how you want to look at it, so adversarially.
Because because that's how life works. Life is a competition. Anybody who thinks otherwise is sleeping under a rock. But
wow, okay.
Because it's not just you. You were not the only person that was telling me to watch this show. I had you and at least 3 other people telling me, they're like, you got to watch this show. You got to watch the show. You got to watch the show. And I kept telling, I had the same response to everybody. I'm like, I don't give a shit about The Karate Kid. I never really cared that much about that movie. Why? Like, stop trying to get me to watch this show. Because, again, we talked ad nauseum about it. There's too much content and we really can't take anybody else's advice now because the algorithm feeds different content to different people based on their own individual tastes. But this was different because this isn't technically a Netflix original, not at least the 2 seasons that we have so far of this show.
Yeah, not yet.
Yeah. And so, Chris, what show are we talking about today?
Well, Dom, today we are talking about the one, the only, Cobra Kai.
Cobra Kai. Strike first, strike hard, no mercy. Or at least, in the case of the rules midway through season 2, a little mercy if, your opponent is on the floor bleeding and dying. But we'll get into that.
Talk about changes of heart, but let's not spoil too much off the bat.
No. Well, too much off the bat because we're going to get into this. There's a lot to talk about here. But people, of course, welcome back. Welcome back to the Talkin TV podcast. I'm Dom. That's Chris. Chris, you make it so much easier when you put it on the side screen like that. That way I don't have to confuse the camera directions. We're the Talkin TV podcast. We are the halfway point between criticisms and collaboration. I gotta come up with a better catchphrase than that. But
hey man, production meeting on Thursday, a little inside baseball, but
yeah,
we'll get it done.
So people, to say the least, it has been it's kind of interesting how the Karate Kid franchise is that one franchise that you would never think would be like a gigantic franchise, but when I went on to look at it, I'm like, yeah, I just realized the original movie had 2 sequels, 1 spin-off movie. There was the remake in 2010, and now it's got a show that is set in the same universe. Like the Karate Kid's got like kind of like its own like little mythos going on. I never realized it. I'm like, all just about it. I'm like, all just about like a very simple coming of age story about a kid moving to a new area and dealing with bullies and dealing with karate. Like, I don't know. Like, if I could just get into my personal relationship with the Karate Kid movies, I watched them when I was a kid. My grandpa and my dad loved them. I watched the first 2. I'm like, okay, these are good. I don't think there's anything special about them, but they're good. I've seen this formula 1.5 million times. Sure, the karate gimmick, I guess, is cool. But other than that, yeah, the acting wasn't amazing. I thought Pat Morita as Miyagi was the best, and he got an Oscar nomination for it, rightfully so, for that first movie. But other than that, yeah, like I just never got it. That was just one of those 80s franchises. Don't get me wrong, I'll be the first person to admit there's a lot of 80s stuff that I do like, but I've got a very weird relationship with most stuff from the 80s. And that's just one of the, you get the cult hits, like your Labyrinths. That's got a huge, Labyrinths and Dark Crystals. Those two movies have huge followings. Your Never-Ending Stories, your Highlanders, a lot of those like weird alternative off the beaten path kind of 80s things. And a few of those just like, I don't get the appeal for. Like I don't get the appeal for Highlander. Labyrinth I just thought was okay, so. I do love Dark Crystal. Dark Crystal's actually really great. But yeah, Karate Kid was just one of those 80s things that I'm like, it's fine, but like I just don't get the appeal for it, But that's not at all the same as your relationship with this franchise, is it, Chris?
Well, Cobra Kai and the Karate Kid to me are very much so two completely different things as far as my personal taste and my history with them. So,
all right, well then I guess just talk about your relationship with the Karate Kid specifically first before we get into Cobra Kai.
Yeah, so the first movie I loved when I was a little kid. I was all about like Rush Hour and, pretty much anything Jackie Chan. And I wasn't allowed to watch Kill Bill when I was little, but I always wanted to. And I was just very much so into like the karate. And as a little kid, I really just appreciated like, and I still do, but I was super into like Asian culture as a little kid. I watched anime, all that type of stuff. So this was obviously like Americanized, but I was like 7, and there was karate in it. I was all about it, and so it falls under the general umbrella of like Asian culture and being borrowed and adaptations and all that type of stuff. And so I was all for it, and I watched this movie a lot when I was like really little, and then I kind of lost touch with it until Cobra Kai came out. I always remembered that the first two had a special place in my upbringing. Like there was one summer where my family sat me down and they're like, look, there are some important movies that you need to watch because these are things that people worked really hard for to make. And when you work hard for something, you can make something great happen. And they knew from an early age I was a little artistic, so this was like a big thing for them and me. And so Karate Kid fell in that list of movies along with the Rockies and the Godfathers and the Star Wars of the world, just like classic like American films. And so it kind of all started when I was little, but then I lost touch with it for like a long time because it is sort of like A, very 80s, and B, better coming of age stories have come out since as far as writing and just being a little more modern, less of the tropes of the 80s, and it's pretty 80s heavy, okay? And everyone knows like the 80s has its own unique nostalgic feel, but it's a little cheesy. It's a little cheesy at point in times. Like Mr. Miyagi was great, obviously, rest in peace, but it is just a little corny for that being said, and I still love it. But Cobra Kai, man, I watched this because I was a little bored and there was nothing really on, and I was like, whatever, I just got, YouTube Premium, and this comes with it, and hey, I used to like the Karate Kid. What's the worst that can happen? I lose a half hour and I don't go past episode 1. But I quickly realized, like, whoa, there's a lot going on in this show. This show is more than just a surface level reprisal of like a cult, like not a cult, a famous 80s, series. It's deeper. Because it's modernized. It kind of like takes all of the 80s tropes, and they're still there. If we want to talk about the character of Johnny to start, he's a hair metal dude. He's driving an old 80s car. He's still partying and drinking like he's in high school, but he's like a 50-year-old man in 2018 when we first meet him. And he's not PC, and he's a little raw, and he's a little rough around the edges, and he's in this new world which is a little softer and a little less cutthroat. And so you quickly realize that there's layers here. So I did grow up loving the Karate Kid, and I cannot wait to do a special Karate Kid event here on our channel in a few weeks, because it's going to be a great way for me to jump back into my upbringing and my like childish love for that film and explore it with my new eyes. But Cobra Kai is something I very much so just love as its own thing, and as I rightfully so, I think it should be talked about as its own thing. It's not just like a fan service to like sell some T-shirts from an old movie that they had left over. I think it's stands on its own legs.
Yeah,
to start with.
It's definitely interesting to say the least. So I guess if you want, we could jump right into it. So Cobra Kai, obviously, unlike the Karate Kid remake that was released in 2010, produced by Will Smith, starring his son Jaden Smith, and Jackie Chan, of course, as Miyagi. Was that even his name in Miyagi? Doesn't matter. They've retconned that movie out of existence. But Yeah. So this series starts off with focusing on Johnny Lawrence, portrayed once again by William Zabka. William Zabka and Ralph Macchio both returned as producers, executive producers on this. The show was created by Josh Heel, John Hurwitz, and I forgot the third guy's name. Those guys have definitely been attached to other things that I've seen.
I've seen John Hurwitz's name before.
I've seen his name on a lot of different things. And so it opens up and you have Johnny who's like passed out in his hotel room drunk. It's a mess. He's clearly taking jobs for money. He's clearly fallen very far. To quote Corey Coleman when he first reviewed the show, when I first saw the promo for the show, he looks like everything that you would have wished would have happened to any one of those movie bullies. And it was interesting because a lot of the times bullies in movies have always been associated with psychopaths, with being like legitimately psychopaths. Like they act like a little bit like even more so than like, yeah, bullies in real life wouldn't do that. And while that's a stigma that's largely been kind of kicked off by Stephen King, I feel like the Karate Kid also had a little bit of a hand in that. But the thing that I enjoy that this show does right off the bat is that I enjoy how it's not picking a side immediately. That's the first thing that I absolutely love about it, is that it wants to take the past and kind of re-examine it from different perspectives and be like, did this happen the way that we remember it? And I guess that's where the appeal for me of the first season comes in, because as we go on to see Johnny, again, things are just not working out for him. He has clearly not had a fun time. And besides being wildly and almost hilariously out of touch, it's a point that's used as a big reference, he's trying to make ends meet. He's living in a crappy motel, and not to mention the fact that on top of having a shitty life that all seemed to stem from that iconic loss in the tournament to Daniel all the way back in 84. On top of that, Daniel just is flooded in his face every chance he gets. Like Daniel's become a very successful car salesman. You know, he kind of worked his way up and became everything that he always wanted to be. Super rich, gorgeous looking family, lives in like, where do they live? Like Beverly Hills or something like that. Like they're living the good life.
It's Encino.
Encino, that's right. The point being is they're living the good life. And Johnny drives around, he sees his billboards, he sees his commercials. Of course, he's become like kind of like a little bit of a local legend ever since the win. And yeah, so Johnny is trying to escape it and he just can't. And of course, what happens? He lives next door to a kid that's getting bullied. It's like you've seen the formula play out over and over again. Yeah, complete deja vu for him, but not maybe in the way that we're thinking exactly.
No,
and of course, it ends up getting to the point where Johnny, he sees this kid getting bullied outside a convenience store. They end up, it's funny because he doesn't actually interfere until they end up like almost trashing his car, I think. And then he's like, okay.
They knock his pizza out of his hand.
That's right. They knock his pizza out of his hand.
And
so he's like, okay.
And he gets pissed because he is quite quickly we learn he's living paycheck to paycheck at the most. And so he needs that slice of pizza.
Yeah, remind me again, is he still driving around the same car that he's been driving like since he was a kid?
He is.
Like how long has he had that? How long did he have that car for?
They talk about that in the first episode.
Yeah, they do. So he ends up defending this kid, and the kid sees the kid whose name is this Ecuadorian kid named Miguel, and they make that very, very apparent. And he's like, "Whoa, oh my God, you're awesome! Could you please train me?" He's like, "No, ew, go away." And then of course, what happens? He ends up having to take the car ends up getting hit. This is all in the first episode. The car ends up getting hit by a couple of girls, one of whom, as we later find out, turns out to be Daniel's oldest daughter, Samantha, and ends up, of course, the car gets brought to a LaRusso auto place. Daniel says, "Oh, sure, no problem. I'll help you fix it for free." Next thing you know, Johnny gets inspired, and he's like, "Screw it. I'm going to reopen Cobra Kai." And he does it. But oh my God, there's so much to break down here. Like, there's so much that I want to talk about as far as what the show does, as far as paying homage to the original, but also kind of generating its own thing. Because I think it's funny because you said the show does do its own thing and does generate its own mythos. I agree with that to an extent. I think that at first the flashbacks, and which are just again stills and uses from the original film, are used very well at certain points. But then as time goes on, I think it becomes a little gratuitous, and I'm like, okay, I get it. You're clearly in love with your own original thing. You don't need to keep cutting back to it. You know, like I get it.
Yeah, it does get a little annoying, especially when they do it in season 2 as well. You're like,
season 2 to me was when I really started to notice it, and I'm like,
it's at least understandable in season 1, but
yeah.
The montages of the it is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. But so I'll tell you what it is I love, because I'm just going to be upfront.
But I also don't think that they do it as much as you're making it out to be. So
They do it. They do it at least once an episode, I thought.
No, that is not true.
Oh,
They do
I might have to go. I might have to go.
They do it 3 episodes in the first season, and they do it 4 in the second.
That's it? Why did it feel like every other minute they were doing it then? And also, did you look that up? Or did you just know that off the top of your head?
Well, I rewatched it before we...
oh, okay. That makes
in preparation.
Sense. That makes sense. No, you're right. Well, I sort of did that. I finished the show literally today. So that
Seeing
works out. I pulled an Avatar.
Yeah, seeing it for the second time in completion. Hey, man, sometimes, look, like you said at the top of this thing, we're living busy lives. But anyways, Dom, let's not divulge too much. Keep going. I was liking where you were heading with all this.
But yeah, so my whole thing is that I liked the first season a lot more than the second season. Because for me, what the first season did was I'm like, okay, it kind of took everything that I really didn't care about in the Karate Kid and actually makes it interesting. It kind of radically changes your outlook on both Johnny and Daniel and gives them extra layers. And at first, for a little bit, get into that when I get into some of my problems with season 2, it seems like, okay, they do actually have legitimate reason for their old rivalry being started. Because, of course, obviously, once Daniel finds out that Johnny is reopening Cobra Kai, it's like all blazing red. He's like, oh, he hasn't changed a bit. Oh, he's just going to kind of inspire a new generation of bullies. And he doesn't at first. But again, one of the actually interesting points that I did like about season 2 is what I'm going to get into, which is how kind of he unintentionally ends up inspiring a new batch of bullies, but from the least expected place. And that's actually one of the things that I really, really, really enjoyed about it. But we'll get into that a little bit later.
Well,
and so
it's one of those things where, like, Daniel doesn't give Johnny the benefit of the doubt at all. And so he kind of, even though Johnny's going through it when they first meet, even though Daniel does offer to fix his car after his daughter smashes into it, like you said, even after Daniel shows him hospitality, Daniel still has this snide, I beat you sense to him. This like, hey, well, look what I'm doing. I'm standing on top of this, like, iron throne, and you're just, like, you know, wearing ripped clothes and looking like you just came off of the street, quite literally, because he did. And so even though he's being nice, he's kind of rubbing it in, and he also is quick to assume the worst the second he sees Cobra Kai's opened up. He doesn't give Johnny the benefit of the doubt at all. So I think it is justified from Billy Zabka, Johnny's standpoint, you know?
Yeah, but that's what I like, is that the show at first doesn't take a side. It shows that kind of like more snide nature that Daniel's got naturally. You know, he's living the good life. He's literally on top of the world. So he's got, again, ego's never justifiable to me in my opinion, but you know, he has that ego there. I mean, while Johnny quickly shows that even though he is trying to turn his life around at first, you know, he hasn't changed one bit. He is still like kind of, again, he's not PC friendly at all. He openly uses terms that, again, are not acceptable. Like, at all, like, very still blatantly racist. And ignorant.
None of which we can say on YouTube, but this guy certainly is not 2018 friendly.
Yeah, not at all.
That's for sure. Let alone 2020 friendly.
Yeah, not at all, to say the least. But what's interesting to me is how, if anything, again, this is kind of something that I kind of admired the show for, is that usually so much of the time, whenever you have a character like that, you always have every other character on the show telling you, no, you can't do that. This is how you actually say this. And the other characters really don't do that. And they kind of just go along with it. And I actually really kind of like that, because I'm like, okay, so this actually, again, it's kind of the opposite of the cancel culture. I'm like, see, cancel culture, take notes. This is how you do this. You just get to know them and see their side of things. That way, you can maybe understand where they're coming from, and then maybe you can start to work on their problems, as you see, to me at least, in the relationship that's formed between Johnny and Miguel, because Miguel obviously is no fool, and he knows that, again, Johnny may not be the best person, but he also, again, he sees him as literally his savior and his mentor, and in the relationship
he's willing to take the good with the bad in that situation.
Yeah, definitely. But he also doesn't hold back when he needs to, and obviously through Johnny,
as time goes on, the growth of Miguel is one of my favorite things of this show.
Yeah, between both season 1 and 2, that's the one thing I will say, is that even though they made some very cliched choices that I hate, it's a reason why I hate some types of these movies and TV shows. I really do enjoy. To me, I think Miguel has the second best arc on the show after Johnny overall. We'll get into some of the other characters in a bit, but Chris,
real quick, I just kind of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dom.
No. I was gonna throw it over to you, so that works.
Perfect. Yeah, I figured. I just wanted to hear like what your throw was gonna be. Let's hear what your throw is gonna be. You know?
No, I was just gonna ask what are your thoughts kind of taking each season, because you watch both seasons back to back, right?
Both, yeah, twice now.
Yeah, both back to back. And what's interesting to me is that, at least about these first 2 seasons, is that obviously now that the show's on Netflix and the 3rd season is going to be a Netflix original, nobody's ever going to remember a time where this wasn't on Netflix. And to people, this will just be a Netflix original. But the interesting thing about these 2 seasons is that these were not made with Netflix. They were made for, like you said, YouTube Premium. They're kind of their platform that they were going to do, that they were doing original content for, that kind of just went away. I don't even know if they're still making stuff. Probably the reason why the 3rd season of Cobra Kai is on Netflix. But what's interesting to me is that the first season did actually seem like it was trying to do something different. And it did feel like it was having, like, it was generating its own mythos. And it had that corn, and it had those cheesy moments, as you said, and I heard a lot of other people saying it had some of those more cliched moments. But to me, the underlying theme was always so strong with the relationships that were formed and kind of what it was trying to go for, that I was able to overlook some of the faults. But what was interesting to me was in season 2, which is still YouTube Premium, I don't know if this was just with the writing or the fact that they kind of knew that, actually, no, this wouldn't have made sense because they made this long before they were ever going to get picked up by Netflix, but it started to feel more like a Netflix show, even though it was nowhere near close to being acquired by that. So I just find that something to be really interesting, and I just want to know if you picked up on any of that before you kind of get into some of your points on it.
Yeah, no, I didn't, because I followed a lot of the production of the show, the behind the scenes. Johnny's, Billy Zabka, Ralph Macchio, they're huge parts of not only being producers, shelling out some cash for this thing to go, but they're also in the writer's room, and it's very much so like a creator-owned show in the truest sense. So I think if it does feel like a Netflix production to you, I think that's just happenstance, because
maybe
they got renewed for season 3. I think I looked it up earlier, 1 or 2 days after season 2 had dropped by YouTube Red, when YouTube Red was still a thing. So it's kind of like, I think it's just happenstance, and I think it's just the way that the show and the writing team grew together. And watch a documentary if you guys want to know the growth of a writer's room. We don't need to get into that right now, but I do kind of want to tackle what I think is interesting about this show, aside from it just being a way to kind of give like a moment back to karate, which is something that was so a part of Hollywood and even television with Chuck Norris, Texas Ranger. Like, he was a dude who was in those types of films, and so you had all these champions like Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan in the past, and I feel like they've kind of gone away, and we don't really have like a new guy doing like karate. Sure, we have like the John Wicks of the world, and all those types of dudes like the Kingsmans and the Keanu Reeves, and it's more action movie based now, and I feel like there's not really like that karate title that's in the zeitgeist. So I kind of appreciate it for that alone, because I've always been a fan of that type of thing. But what the thing I think the most interesting is how they kind of show, like, just because you're woke and you're PC doesn't mean that someone who isn't is wrong. He could be going through a terrible day in his life. His every day of his life could be a terrible day in his life. Your worst day could be this guy's best day. So even though Johnny clearly is wrong about a lot of the things that he thinks and acts upon, he just is trying his whole life to get afloat and get out from under the aftermath of quite literally being crushed by Daniel LaRusso back in the day, that he doesn't have time to really, brush up on his politics or not offend someone, because every day he is fighting to get this chip off of his shoulder. So I just think it's an interesting kind of like anti-hero approach to not only tackling the character outside of the political context, but tossing the political context of the modern day. It not only shows the growth of the villain, the character that we now know isn't really that bad of a guy as time goes on. He just was never misunderstood, because the earlier films were through Daniel's eyes. We could have just stayed in the mythos of the Karate Kid, but they chose to toss some light political context on it. And I think it's just a really cool way to say, like, again, he is wrong, but why don't we, instead of just, kicking him and keeping him down for being wrong, why don't we at least try to open his eyes as to what the right way is? And then he has a choice once he is informed to to either change his ways, or then he's choosing to be ignorant and choosing to be wrong. And I thought that was actually interesting, because a lot of people are either super into politics or they're only a little into politics. And so it's tough when you're only a little bit into it, because it just constantly evolves and it constantly moves. And as we all know, Dom, adapting to our new schedule this week, it's tough to keep up with pretty much anything, let alone this podcast, which we love so much. So I thought that was just interesting too. And the fact that they're, kind of like at this point, they're the same exact age that they like were when their characters ended in the show. They just did it so right. The time jump was done so right. And so it's really cool to see the reflection of, because obviously, guys, spoiler alert, each master sensei gets their student who is kind of like their embodiment of their younger years, and except they're both trying to do right by their students. So Daniel is trying to sort of let go of his prim and properness and being like, perfect about everything. And Johnny's trying to like say, look, like, you don't always have to fight dirty. I know I said that, but I didn't mean it. I was angry. And so it's kind of cool how they're trying to learn through their students. So I just think like the moral compass of the show, even though it is a little cheesy, it is, I guess, a little better than a CW show, but not. It's in the wheelhouse. I appreciate it for all that. You know what I'm saying, Dom?
Yeah, I do. And definitely, I'm actually really glad that you brought that up, because that literally directly leads me into, to me, I think one of the best elements of the show, which is the idea that just because... Which is that just because the characters are trying to be better doesn't necessarily mean that they're going about it the right way. And as a result, you see that rub off on their students, because the whole thing is that, to me, the best element, and this to me is an element that does carry over into season 2, especially once you see that guy standing between those two come back.
Yeah, that's why I chose this image.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that one of the pinnacle moments of the show is in the finale of season 1, where you see all of Johnny's students, a couple of them very radicalized. Like Miguel is not the same person that he was at the beginning of the season. Eli, or as he becomes to know, Hawk, who, oh man, we'll get into talking about that kid, is not at all the same kid. And you see them, and yeah, they've taken all the lessons that Johnny has taught them to heart, clearly, and it's very clearly radically changed them, but not necessarily for the best. And that's actually what I really, really like about it, is that it shows that there is a reason why, I guess, for lack of a better word, I can't believe I'm saying this, but to give a voice to them, there is a reason why so many people are making such a giant thing about not necessarily politics and why you get it correct so often, but toxic masculinity, because you see it rub off negatively on the younger, on the lesson formed, on the more vulnerable, and you see that it doesn't have a good effect, because unfortunately, as smug as Daniel is, everything that Daniel was worried about with Cobra Kai does happen, because Johnny does, especially once Kreese comes back, that guy.
Yeah.
You see that he did kind of unintentionally start a new generation of bullies, and that especially comes even more to a head in the season 2 finale. But we'll get into that
too. It's so sad too, because for the first time ever in Johnny's life, he's trying to do the right thing. He doesn't quite know how, but you can tell he's genuinely trying, and he is rough around the edges, but he's not trying to create a new generation of bullies. It's just that these young, impressionable minds and his rawness, his kind of like old school mentality just don't go well together. And it's actually a really interesting dichotomy if you think about it for this type of show, especially to explore.
Especially for YouTube. Like, I was shocked. Like, when the show was going that in depth, I was like, whoa. And the interesting thing too is that the same actually plays out in reverse, because the whole thing is that obviously now this is a vastly different generation of bullies than it was back in the 80s. So to me, it was kind of funny seeing those really dumb hipster kids, and I'm like seeing, wait, those guys are the bullies, and I was kind of chuckling a little bit until they started beating down on them, and I'm like, ugh, okay, but I'm like, these guys are so pathetic, because even when they're threatening, I'm like, well, not those two.
No,
but
these
I'm
are the
talking
main
bullies
two.
from the first
yeah,
season.
it's one of the police two up at some point.
Miguel and Hawk. But I'm like the other two, but like the bullies from the first season. It's funny because every time I saw them, being bullies, I was just kind of chuckling, because I'm like, I can't. I'm like, these guys are hipsters. I can't take these guys seriously as bullies. Yeah. But what I find interesting is how, in the first season, before she kind of, goes into her arc, Daniel's daughter, Samantha, who becomes a big part of it, was dating the lead bully, obviously. And, again, the whole thing is that this guy appeared harmless. Like, he was such a dope. He was a doofus. He's Asian. And he didn't even know, like, what, what's it called? He didn't even know what sashimi was, like, in the scene where he's having daughter with Daniel, which is
I love
so
that
tragic.
Scene, man.
That's tragic to me, just as a sushi lover in general, which I'm like, wow.
I know,
okay.
That killed me.
I'm like, way to disrespect your own culture that way. But but again, like, and it leads to, but again, even that's a little bit of a red herring, because again, it leads to, again, the first of many awesome moments in the show when Miguel takes what Johnny's taught him and handles all of those bullies easily and kicks the crap out of them to the point where they kind of like end up becoming the popular kids. But again, it's so funny because so much of the time, if this were like a CW or any other show, the show would just take them as like the heroes of the school and leave them at that. But no, this show, at least for the first season, actually goes the extra step further and shows, oh no, now they're at the top. Now they're at the top of the food chain. Now you're going to see how that power corrupts. And oh, it does. It does. And you especially see that once Miguel inevitably starts dating Samantha, which is cool. Again, that was the thing where I'm like, okay, his student, his daughter, when are they going to get together? But then you have the wild card that comes in, which is, of course, the third kind of storyline. So you've got the A storyline with Daniel and Johnny. You've got the B storyline with Miguel and Samantha, I would say. And then the C storyline, to me, kind of the wild card that comes in and then kind of throws a kink in everything in order to jump up all these relationships is Johnny's son, Robbie Keene, portrayed by Tanner Buchanan, who comes in. I don't remember, was it the second or third episode that he comes in? Or is he in the first episode?
You know, that I don't know. But he's
man,
early
you
season
just did
one.
the rewatch. He's in there early season one, and you can just tell that like Johnny not having a role in this life has taken a bad effect. But it's not just Johnny too that I would like to add. It's that they don't make it solely Johnny's fault. And if anything, I think while not they do a good job of explaining why Johnny wasn't there without totally vilifying him. It shows that no, his mom is just as much to blame. His mom is very clearly an addict, out with guys every other week, as you see later on, not paying the bills when she needs to, and he's clearly fallen in with the wrong crowd. But what I find interesting about this character is that besides the fact that he's got a look, no offense to this guy, but he's got a look that just like makes me want to punch him in the face. I don't blame him at all for that, but he's just one of those characters that just look like, you're like, come on, man. Like you would have so much potential to look so much better, but it's like, cut your friggin' hair. Like nobody has that hair anymore.
Yeah.
So, but the thing that I like is that what he does at first as a means of getting back at his dad, by getting a job at LaRusso Auto, ends up spawning into like this whole other thing where he ends up getting trained, of course, by Daniel and Miyagi-Do. And then, of course, you have the inevitable soap opera moment at the end of the first season where it's like, oh my God, you were his son? You never told me? You know, that whole moment. That whole moment.
So soap opera.
After an episode that was already pretty, like I said, the show does a pretty good job of balancing out the nostalgia with everything else. But that was the moment where I'm like, okay, that whole episode, they're reminiscing. And I'm like, of course, it's going to end with them making peace, and then he's going to be in the studio and he's going to tell him that he's his son, and it's going to all fall apart as per usual. But and that was after the whole incident with the idiot cousin and almost destroying his car.
And you know, we spoke about Miguel's progression. Let's also talk about, you know, Samantha and Robbie's.
Yeah, Samantha and
all
Robbie's.
These young characters, all of our young leads, even Hawk, who's like kind of a side character, they just do such a good job exploring each of these characters. And when you meet them, for better or for worse, with season 2, I have my thoughts about season 2 as well. They are completely different people, and they at least have been through justifiable journeys. It wasn't just like, well, they have to get from point A to point B. It's like, no, let's make it compelling. Even if you don't like it, it at least makes sense, and it's at least thought out. And it's not like we have 23, 24-year-olds who look on the younger side playing these kids. These are literally kids who were playing act like their age for the most part. It's very impressive to me.
Yeah,
to be honest with you,
very, very impressive. Yeah, especially
not
so
to side,
now,
not to side throw you there. I think people got to understand that like some of the reason why the show is a little rough is because like these kids are literally the ages that they're playing for the most part.
Right,
and that impresses me.
If anything, that does impress me a lot because, again, I do feel like I'm legitimately watching kids. Again, I still have to get behind the fact that most of these kids were born after 99, which is insane to me. But
welcome to my life, Dom.
Yeah, right. I was about to say, you got to feel even weirder than me. But so I guess if we could jump into the finale of season 1 and then into season 2. So finale, again, season 1 ends very much how you would expect at the All Valley tournament. But again, the finale of season 1, again, what I think it does very, very well is that it shows on both sides that, yeah, Johnny may not have necessarily taught his students the lessons that he would have wanted to. And Daniel also again, may have accomplished what Johnny didn't. And again, Johnny gives a very... Again, I'm not going to say good reason, but he gives a justifiable reason. Not to me that I would ever think that missing the birth of your kid is ever a justifiable reason in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But the point being is that...
I know what you mean.
To top it all off, as if that wasn't enough, as if Miguel and Hawk starting to become like more like aggressive aggro males wasn't already bad enough, then you got... Pull up the picture of him. You know who I'm talking about. Then you get... this motherfucker who comes back in the finale of season 1, seemingly out of nowhere, in the shadows, black trench coat.
You keep talking.
Smoking the cigar. He literally walks in. I'm like, Jesus, did this guy just like get stuck in an 80s like Mickey Rourke, Eric Roberts action movie and then just never leave it.
Totally
I feel like
did.
I feel like he totally did.
God,
yeah, and that would of
hilarious.
course be.
Keep filling it. I almost have the image up, Dom.
No, but the point
Sorry,
I'm just
I
gonna say
wasn't
because
expecting
you're taking too long. God damn it. Martin Coves. Does he have the same first name in the show? Martin Coves, John Kreese, right? Yeah, that's what you see. Yeah, Martin Coves, John Kreese. Yeah, and it's funny because I love how. I mean, I don't know if this was the show's intention to try and get you to fall for this guy and see if he was ever going to actually change his leaf, but the show very clearly, to me at least, was like, yeah, no, this guy is the true bad guy here. You know, they did a lot of interesting stuff with Johnny in the first season where they showed his backstory and showed, oh, maybe Johnny's childhood wasn't as, pristine as he made it out to be, with obviously his stepdad and everything. But then once this guy comes in, you're like, oh, man. And Johnny tries to fight him, and that doesn't work. And then this guy ends up worming his way right back in and starts to infect Cobra Kai from the ground up, and it starts to infect everything. But as much as Kreese, to me, is kind of a shadow overhanging the entire second season, I do also have to say that, again, this is a little bit of a low point for Daniel because Daniel starts to, as said by his wife a little bit, and I also have to give major props to the wife, too, because that is a character that could have so easily fallen into the nagging wife category, but to me, she always has a justifiable reason, and she is always like a very relatable, very interesting character, so I do have to give them major props for that, too.
If anything, I think she further helps to inform the growth of Daniel as a person and why he's so successful. He chose like a viable partner, and you're totally right. Good observation, man.
Not to mention the fact that she's also works really well as like kind of like this mini commentary of like, oh yeah, you guys are 50 years old and you still are continuing a rivalry that you had when you were teenagers. Okay,
I love that, dude.
That's not pathetic at all. And I was just always chuckling like whenever she brought that up. that always gave me a good chuckle. But
the good cheese,
exactly. Yeah, but so. I guess if anything, Daniel, the season 2 is also a little bit of a blight on Daniel because Daniel reopens Miyagi-Do, as he says, and it starts to interfere with the rest of his life. It starts to interfere with his parental duties. It starts to interfere with his professional duties. And it's certainly interesting because you've got Kreese now infecting and worming his way into Johnny's students. You've got Daniel, everything that's going on with there. Then you've also got a little bit of a new catalyst that comes in with the Tori character, the Peyton List character, which that was insane seeing her because I don't think I've seen her in anything since Jesse. And needless to say, that girl grew up, but she comes in and she's very clearly the bad girl, and she's kind of like the new coin that's thrown into the three-way, little love triangle that you've got going on between Miguel, Samantha, and Robbie. But then, so there's that, and that character, like I said, I'll get into your thoughts on that character in a little bit because I've got some thoughts on her. But then to add insult to all that, you have a fallout between Eli and their friend Dimitri, who, as you see, tried to do karate multiple times, but that's another kid. I'm sorry. I know what they're trying to go for, but that kid is so fucking annoying, and I kept waiting for somebody to put, and not gonna lie, that was one of the most satisfying moments to me when he does the thing to crease his tattoo, and next thing you know, you just see him running out of the studio with like a bloody nose. I'm like, oh man, I know what they're trying to do, but thank God, this kid just needs to get the crap knocked out of him. And
yeah, sometimes it's like that, especially with these young punks we're dealing with.
Yeah, to say the least. So I don't know if it was a writing thing. Maybe it was just because I wasn't a fan of the overall negative direction. Like, if anything, I'm glad that they went with it and showed that, like, the toxic masculinity, especially now that Kreese is back, is getting really, really bad now. But especially, obviously, once it shows that, specifically with this Tori character and everything, how she's just like, oh, I'm poor and my mom had to like bring home leftovers for us and she got fired. So as a result, like us not being rich just gives us an excuse to be shitty, and like that girl is that girl is not a good character. She is not a good character at all. So this kind of becomes the backdrop for season 2.
Yeah,
and
I think
will
this
say
image
that,
on the screen right now is pretty much the entire backdrop of season 2,
And what I will say is that as much as I do enjoy them going for the angle, I felt like there were certain points where the corniness and the soap opera-iness of it started to get a little bit annoying for me. And there were points where Daniel was starting to get a little bit exposition-y with the constant lessons. And there were certain points where, like, okay, you're just repeating this. And there were certain points where it's like, okay, I know that Johnny is not going to understand what's it called? Obviously, it's part of Johnny's arc that he doesn't see through Kreese's line of bullshit. But even that, to me, stretched out a little bit long. And I'm like, okay, I think how they dealt with it was interesting. And Kreese to me started to feel a little bit too much of like a comic book villain at points. Like at the very least, say what you will, but like he did feel like a human being. at the end in the original movies. But in this show, he feels like something right out of a cartoon. I'm like, okay, are you even a real person at points? Not at first, but as time goes on. And then...
Yeah, but listen, let me just interject a few points here before we get too far off from them, all right? I think I can see where you're coming from as someone who isn't admittedly the biggest fan of the movies or doesn't at least have some nostalgia attached to them, because while there is homage in season 1, and I still think it's only homage in season 2, I do think, someone who is kind of only invested in the Cobra Kai story and doesn't really care about what happened in 1980 could consider it a little exposition-y, because it does run on for a little long. Thinking of those scenes where, Daniel's training Sam and Johnny's kid in the backyard, and they're sparring, and it's just, we get it. You're the new Miyagi, and you have to do it, and okay, yeah, we get it. And with Kreese, though, I think it was supposed to be predictable, because I think the whole thing is, even though Johnny, for once, is doing something, at least from his perspective, someone who, as we said, doesn't have the best moral compass, is doing something from the heart, and at least as straight and narrow as he can. It just goes to show how simple-minded he is, and also not even simple-minded. I think that was the wrong word. I think I want to actually roll that back and say, just how even though he is starting to let the past go, it still very much so controls him. And so he instantly, once Kreese shows up, he's like, I need to get the respect of my old teacher back. Like, I'm still stuck in 1980. I'm still stuck with Daniel LaRusso towering over me, in the All-Valley competition. I'm still stuck back then, even though we're both adults now. And this is my dojo now. I'm still trying to redeem my glory days. And so I think that... takes it a little bit deeper than what you're saying, but I also see how that's thin, and how really without the kids having so much progression in this season, if it was just the adults, it would be a pretty terrible soap opera.
Yeah, definitely. Like the adult stuff to me was the weakest part. And while I liked what the kids were doing and I like what they stand for, I still wasn't the biggest fan of some of the characterizations of them. Like I said, very teeny boppy, very soap opera-ish, where it's like, why aren't you talking to me? All that.
But
and
I do gotta say that one scene where Kreese is like having them like, dig and flip the tires and do all that stuff, and it's like kind of illegal and all that. Like, that to me shows that, like, okay, well, Johnny has a choice here. So I think they did everything right. It's just like it was a generic plot line. Like, we've seen it all before.
It may have been It may have been a situation where the kind of the genericness of it was, like I said, to me, the first season did a really good balance between.
I agree.
Maintaining its tone with the homage in order to generate something new. This season was when it started to fall a little bit out of bounds. But like I said, that doesn't mean that this season didn't have a lot of good stuff in it. I still think that, to me, besides Johnny, again, bringing in Kreese, I think that even though I may not have necessarily liked what they did with him, I still think it was essential to Johnny's arc, especially when you see him get back together with his old boys in that episode, which that was a charming episode. I like that episode where he gets back together with his old buddies. But on top of that, you also see how now with Kreese is really starting to affect things with the students, because while Miguel might be having some moral quandaries and troubles with the fact that he has to, what's it called, with the whole no mercy thing and starting to relive things, because obviously he's still pining over Samantha, but now with Torian, Hawk is all in, and Hawk, like, dude, that kid goes from being like a pretty sympathetic character the first season to like being almost like a straight up sociopath. Like,
that kid for real, dude.
Like, he freaking like gang ambushes his friend in the mall. He trashes Miyagi-Do. He starts acting like a total aggro bro, and I'm like, dude, all you got was a mohawk and an eagle tattoo on your back, and now you're like,
the power goes to his head, man.
It clearly does, and it gets bad. Like, there's a point, like that scene where him and Miguel are fighting in the woods for the headbands and that thing. Also, real quick, I just want to give a quick shout out to Paul Walter Hauser, Richard Jewell himself in that season as what was his nickname? That guy.
I'm not remembering that off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Let me pull it up.
Did you know that? Did you know that was the same guy who was Richard Jewell?
I didn't pick up on that. Oh
yeah,
man,
it's the same guy. It's the same guy.
Oh,
you always have that. Yeah, you always have that giddy little reaction whenever you see whenever I reveal something that you didn't know. But yeah, no, Paul Walter Hauser, I really liked.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Damn. Okay, he really took on the character though.
Yeah, no, I liked him in this show a lot. I really liked him. I thought that bit where he was hiding in the dirt and then popped up and took the headband. I'm like, okay, that's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, I love how he doesn't understand that he's like, but he still becomes badass, But he doesn't understand at first that, like, hey man, like, no one really wants you here. He's just so clueless and charming in that sense. There were some good cast additions, but I also think that this show kind of added a little too much for its own good in this season. Like, it got a little bit away from the basics, and so I think it kind of lost itself. And when you add more characters, and especially with how deep they like to explore the characters, like I keep saying, believe it or not, with Cobra Kai.
Yeah, like there were 2 side characters that joined Cobra Kai, and then one ended up going to Miyagi-Do and one stayed at Cobra Kai, and that one, and like they had like a little bit of like a resolved moment in the end, but I'm like,
I mean, yeah, Paul Walter Hauser
we
was...
barely got to know you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'd say not that he was like the gag, but like he was kind of like, you know, like one of the more jokey trope type characters, but still like you did introduce a new character. And so I think a lot of the reasons to me why season 2 suffers is more so time management and figuring out how to handle.
You think so?
I think so, because I still like the characters a lot and I don't hate their choices. I just think it was doing really well. It was the first and only hit from YouTube Red, so I feel like there's got to be some pressure there as well. And
pretty sure only ever hit.
Yeah.
If their future is to be assumed,
I'm pretty sure it's done now. So here he is.
Yeah,
Here's
pretty sure.
Look, he looks so different than Richard Jewell side. No, I didn't even pick up
I know
on it.
that's what I mean. That's the guy. That's Paul Walter Hauser.
What do you
He was originally
think?
supposed to be the Penguin.
Do you think that's me loving it too much and making an excuse that it
I
was,
will
or?
definitely admit, only because you did call me out on this a lot in Project Power. You know, we definitely have talked about this a lot, that, you know, our nostalgia love of something will sometimes blind us to the quality. But I'll be the first person to admit, again, I don't care. I understand that those Transformers movies are terrible, but I love every single one of them. But that's a different thing. But I will certainly admit I've let my nostalgia blind me to the quality of certain things before Stranger Things. But the one thing that I will say is that as problematic as season 2 did get, it ended in quite possibly one of the greatest finales I've ever seen. Because as horseshitty and as soap opera-y as the buildup was to that final fight, when they said, when we got that Rumble, oh man, we got that Rumble, and they did not hold back. And Chris, I don't know about you, but that fight is my favorite moment of the show. Like, when we're off this podcast, I'm gonna go back and rewatch that moment. That's how freaking awesome it was.
Dude, I mean, I saw a lot of people say this, and I still kind of stand by it. I think without that fight, there's only so much level characters can do to make up for poorer writing, in my opinion. Season 2 had much poorer writing than season 1. And more tropes that aren't as forgivable as the ones in season 1. So, yeah, man, that was a finale for the ages.
That was how you do a goddamn
I'm glad you like that, Dom. I really am glad.
I don't know what it is.
Because I was nervous about it.
Yeah, 2019, with the exception of Game of Thrones to me, was a year that had a lot of great just season finale. Like, you had the Succession season 2 finale on the yacht. Obviously, the Watchmen finale. The Barry season 2 finale, which was insane. You know, like a lot of really, really good finales. But this one, this one is just the next in a long line of it. And goddamn, they did not hold back. Like, how it starts off. And I felt like I was watching World War I, where it's like all the pieces are falling into place. And I'm like, oh man, it's about to be war. And then you see Cobra Kai and Miyagi-Do and everything that Daniel and Johnny didn't want, because they said in the episode before, Johnny said, Kreese is the one that always wanted war. I have no desire. I don't want a conflict of any kind. But needless to say, you could literally say that it has all been building to there, because because the whole thing that I was thinking, I'm like, okay, obviously if season 1 ended with the All Valley thing, they can't do the same thing. And I think that it was a great way to show kind of how far the characters have come and where they are now, and how this was kind of the only way to resolve it. Because obviously the Tori character, the Peyton List character, she's only capable of resolving things one way, and she had her little rivalry going on with Samantha. And even though it wasn't as focused on, Miguel definitely had a thing against Robbie, because he kind of viewed Robbie as the guy that took away his girl, even though Sam kind of was already kind of starting that away train for Miguel.
Which I think he did to himself, to be honest with you. He just didn't...
Robbie?
No, Miguel.
Miguel
he
absolutely
was just
did
too,
to himself.
like you keep saying, too hopped up on his own power, that he just didn't realize that he was getting so far away from everything that he wanted to become.
Yeah, definitely. And it all comes to a culmination. And obviously the whole thing with Eli and Dimitri, where Dimitri, as part of the fact that, Eli, you're not the same kid that I was friends with, and he makes that wetting the bed speech beforehand, and Eli's like, oh, you're dead. And then Dimitri finally, after a season where it felt like they were trolling us with how bad Dimitri was at karate,
right,
he finally actually learns to fight back and takes down his old friend. And it's kind of heartbreaking, because again, even with as much of a sociopath as that kid became, I still really liked Hawk and what they did with him, Eli.
Yeah.
And then and I still love that this is a bit that they were able to throw in, but when Paul Walter Hauser is interviewing for the for the security guard position, and then was like, "Oh, don't worry, I got this." He comes in, but he only starts taking out the Miyagi-Do kids. I love that. I thought that was and then he like fist bumps the one Cobra Kai kid. I love that. But
that was good.
it was a rumble, and I loved how like they had like their own mini fights. You know, Sam versus Tori, Robbie versus Miguel, Eli versus Dimitri, and it all worked out really well. And they did not hold back when it came to showing like the results of that fight. Like it was not a winner takes all thing, and it showed that like the blame didn't necessarily come from where you would think, because as it shows, Miguel showed Robbie mercy, and we saw what happened after that. The kid freaking gets picked up and chucked off a balcony and like gets a what? Like he got like a spinal fracture and was put in a coma, and Sam gets the shit beat out of her, but I think she still manages to get the drop on Tori. But I was like, oh man, like way to raise the stakes for the next season.
I know, and it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning of this episode, where it's like, you know, the villains might not be as crystal clear as you think they are.
Yeah.
This show, for all that it is, and that whole fight scene, the breaking off into the one-on-one fights, I mean, that's very tropey, but that's like good cheese, you know? That's like the kind of cheese you like.
And the choreography, too, I got to say, is amazing in the show for how low of a budget they have. And it's very clearly a low budget. I am impressed with the choreography involved with all the actors and the stunt coordinators and the stuntmen, if there are any.
And again, you got to take into account that these are young actors for the most part.
Yeah.
And so it's very impressive. But, dude, I do got to say, like, you know, Miyagi-Do doesn't look too good going into season 3.
No, it doesn't.
And who really is...
And neither does Cobra Kai for that matter, though.
Well, I'm talking about morally, but physically Cobra Kai is not looking too good either. And who really is, like, the voice of reason in this show?
There's
so
any
much
left?
pettiness and so much hatred going on that it's... I love the ambiguity. The ambiguity here of the tone and of the perspectives and of the good-naturedness or lack thereof. It just makes it so interesting, and it kind of forgives season 2, because what I think we're going to get in season 3 is going to be so worthy of unpacking where we left off. I think they saved the season, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, fingers crossed, assuming of course that Netflix doesn't fuck it up like they do most things.
Well, actually, just so you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that this show was bought and paid for by YouTube. Netflix covered the production cost. They're releasing season 3, which was shot by YouTube Red on Netflix, but Netflix is going to fund season 4 if it goes.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
We're going to get the true vision here. The true payoff of season 2. Yeah.
All right. So in that case, I mean, I guess it's interesting that you say kind of now with there being a lot of pettiness on both sides and you don't know if this conflict can ever be resolved. I find it interesting that they chose to make the closing shot of the season Allie, the Elizabeth Shue character from the original, accepting the friend request, which means that, look, they brought back Randy Heller as the mom. They brought back Martin Cove. You know Elizabeth Shue is coming back for season 3. Like, Ralph Macchio pretty strongly hinted at it. Again, she was only on one season of The Boys, and we all saw what happened to her there. But, baked by Homelander. But, she's coming back for season 3, most definitely.
I'm all for it, man.
I guess with that being said, I think we're going to have to wrap it up now. But the last thing that I wanted to point out, which I think is really interesting, is, again, to me, in kind of its weird quest to pay homage to the Karate Kid, but also do its own thing, the show kind of stumbled into a thing that I noticed with another karate-involved thing, which is the idea of toxic masculinity. Because if you remember, our good friend Pat Huber, one of his choices for his top 10 best movies of last year was The Art of Self-Defense, which I still haven't seen that movie, but from what I've read about it, it deals with a very, very similar scenario, ironically enough, to the show, which is where kind of geeky, nerdy kid gets beat up, wants to learn how to toughen himself up, joins a karate dojo, ends up solving kind of this issue of toxic masculinity that's involved with said karate dojo. And it's almost kind of the same thing here, obviously, albeit done very differently. So I guess the last point that I wanted to bring up before we got out of here was, what is it with karate things and dealing with toxic masculinity? Like, is that just like a thing that we're going to see now with like every new karate thing? Like, is that just like a thing that was always there and they're just tackling it now because it's 2020 and everyone's woke? Like, did I miss something here? Or
look, I think it's a sign of the times always going forward in media. I think that's something we're just all going to have to accept. And I mean, I personally don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but what I will say is, I know you don't. I'm just saying, like, in general speaking, like, sometimes it does get a little heavy, and so I do enjoy how Cobra Kai kind of chooses to use, like I said at the top of this thing, Johnny as a way to say, like, okay, but we should hear someone out sometimes too. But I think karate for so long had been a boys' club in a sense, like in film and in television. And I mean, you took karate classes when you were a little kid. Was there
one day?
I
For
mean,
literally one day, and I don't remember anything from
Okay.
it. I don't remember a single thing. I was not there long enough in order to be able to comment on the inner workings. I would have to talk to some of my contacts that I know did karate for years.
And so I think it's a little bit of like tackling that, where it's like we see that a lot going on right now with sports. People complain that like, why is the WNBA not as popular as the NBA and things like that nature, just trying to like give equal voices. But I think Karate Kid, if there was any, or karate, sorry, if there was any, I guess it's artistic, but it's also combative. So it's like a half sport, half art thing, in my opinion. Someone who's not like a Joe Rogan, like well versed in the MMA world, I think it can be perceived as a bit of a boys' club. So if you're talking about Hollywood and where Hollywood's moral compass is at right now, it kind of makes sense that they would take this angle for it, which is why I so much so, again, got to double down on appreciating Cobra Kai, saying like, look, give someone the benefit of the doubt until they prove you wrong, but at least try and inform them why they're being wrong. And then if they choose to still be wrong, well, then you did all you could and it's on them.
Yep,
so
pretty
I don't
much.
know, does that answer what you're saying? Because it's tough. It's tough
A little
to
bit.
unpack that.
A little bit. No, it definitely is. But I just felt like it was a worthy question.
It is, yeah.
To bring up, especially considering that this theme has now popped up in not one but two very similar minded, properties. So I just found that really
And the
interesting.
more
so with that
recent
being, very recent too. So I guess with that being said, my final thoughts on this are Cobra Kai is not a show that I ever thought I was going to like in any way, shape, or form. As you guys know, I fought watching it. I'm like, I don't give a shit about the Karate Kid. Why the fuck am I going to care about some dumb show about them 30 years later? I'm like, great. They're 50 years old and they're still fighting. Like, who cares? But I got to say that as corny and a soap opera-y as it got, I did very, very much enjoy Cobra Kai. At the worst, it's another quick binge that you could just throw on in the background. At best, it's another thing that you think would be pretty disposable, like 99.9% of Netflix's other content. But if you watch it there and you'll get something out of it. And for those diehard fans of the Karate Kids, oh man, you guys are gonna go gaga for this. It's funny because this is probably one of the only times I'm ever gonna do this, but I have to rank the two seasons differently because we don't have enough yet, I feel like, to rank the show overall. So I'm giving season 1 4 stars, and I'm giving season 2 3.5. It very easily could have been a 3, but that last fight saved it.
I was going to ask you that. Okay.
Yeah, that last fight, I'm telling you, dude, like I was this close. I'm like, if this fight that I've been hearing about is not as good as they said it was, but it was every bit as good and better.
Good. I'm glad, man. So I got to ask you two things. All right.
Yeah.
Are you planning on sticking with the show?
Yeah, I'll stick with the show because I am legitimately interested to see where they go with season 3. And at this point, it's a matter of will the soap opera Netflixy sensibilities of the show annoy me more than what I'm able to take away of interest from the story, I guess is the contest now that we are in.
Gotcha. And I got to ask you this too, because this was kind of like my beating down your doorstep day in and day out to watch it type thing.
Yeah.
Was it worth the watch, or did it feel like homework in a sense?
No, I would say it was a very quick binge. It's funny because I was worried that this was going to feel like homework and that this was going to be a stretch. But no, I got this whole thing over with in like 4 days. If anything, I just again, if I hadn't started my new job, I would have gotten it done with quicker.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I just that's just more so me feeling bad that
I
was
know.
like, Tom, you gotta watch this.
Dude, I've done that to you how many times now?
Man.
Don't feel bad.
Fair enough.
Anyways, Chris, your final thoughts.
Yeah, my final thoughts are, look, the show's not perfect, but if you go into it thinking it's going to be perfect, well, then you're going to be sorely mistaken. But
yeah, if you go in thinking anything's perfect now, that's kind of on you.
that is 100% on you. But again, I think, like Dom and I have said, this show is more than meets the eye. That's a little nod to our Transformer episode, which not enough of you guys have listened to, but we had a really
Seriously,
great
go
conversation.
listen to that episode.
One of our funniest moments.
I listed like 20 different amazingly stupid things about the Michael Bay movies.
Exactly.
Go listen to it.
Go
for
check
that
that out.
alone.
The Netflix Transformers miniseries we covered this year. But yeah, the show is more than meets the eye, and it just does such a good job of sort of taking everyone's sides of both the political landscape and the characters and giving them a voice and kind of like saying to the audience, okay, well, you figure out who's right and wrong, because clearly these characters can't do it for themselves. And I think that's interesting, and that's something that I kind of haven't seen even some of like the more bigger budget shows do. Watchmen's one of the only ones that really comes to mind that challenged my thought process as much as Cobra Kai. So it's absurd to think that like Cobra Kai can even be mentioned along with Watchmen in regards to like the morality of it all. But it doesn't do a bad job of leaving you with something to think about. So yeah, I mean, I think I gotta do the same thing Dom did. So season 1, I'm gonna go with 4.5 out of 5, and I think I'm gonna be right there with you, Dom. I think season 2 is 3.5 because it was a little schlocky. It was a little tough to get through.
It definitely was the point where the soap opera elements really started to rear their ugly head.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh god, and I was starting to be that watcher. I was like, this is gonna happen. This is gonna happen. I was just kind of like starting to get to the point where I was making fun of it as I was watching it. I'm like, oh no, I don't want to get to that point.
Yeah. But hey, guys, we will be covering season 3. And I'm very excited
when it eventually
about
drops sometime. Supposedly, like I said, I haven't seen heard any promos of this, but I think it's supposed to be dropping sometime in like the October, November. I know they didn't want to release it immediately because they wanted obviously eyes on the first 2 seasons, you know, to make sure. And like I said, it's again continuing with how Netflix has been working this year. Again, it worked for Community, it worked for Avatar, and it looks to be working with Cobra Kai.
And that's just Netflix for you. So
yep, that is Netflix for
and
you.
Also,
so with
we
that,
will be hosting a Karate Kid watch along. And more info will be coming on that soon. That's all I can tell you.
Most definitely.
But
yes, stay tuned.
Keep your eyes peeled. I hate to do that, but this is such a niche
information.
topic that I think like whoever's listening to this is going to go for the Karate Kid watch along. So we might as well tell them while they're here.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. We should. So, people, once again, thank you for tuning in to yet another episode of Talkin TV. I'm Dom, the movie nerd. That's Chris, the TV nerd. We release content every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Chris just put out, by the time this episode will be released, Chris just put out a new episode in his recap series covering Lovecraft Country on HBO, covering episode 3. Chris, I can't wait to hear your thoughts on that. It's going to be very interesting, continuing in my very rocky relationship so far with that show. What's it called? We've got a lot of, let's just say that certain theaters might be opening around us, so we might actually be able to go and see some new movies. So you might see some new reviews for movies that were released in theaters coming out soon. So just stay tuned for that.
I wonder what movies those could be.
Oh, yeah, big, very suspenseful as far as what they could be. But yeah, guys, we're on Facebook and Instagram, Talkin TV, no G, on both Facebook and Instagram, if you didn't hear that. Again, new content every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Chris, do you have anything you want to leave the good people with?
Well, I want to tell them that even though you are here right now watching the video, if you're not here, though, on video form and you're here in audio form, A, what are you doing? Because our YouTube channel is just absolutely popping off. And B, if you're on YouTube, have you subscribed yet? Have you clicked on the channel like I just did? Have you come over to the subscribe button? Have you clicked it? And have you turned on that bell for notifications? Because if you haven't, please do so. It would really help us out, and we'd really appreciate it.
We're at 81 subscribers. We have 19 left before we get to 100.
Seriously, look at all of this content we do. Just go to videos. We cover everything from Avatar to
Community,
Palm Springs,
and not much else. We covered comedy. We covered Netflix. I mean, we did a whole series on Marvel. Look at Chris. Scroll to the Community video. Look at how many views that stupid Community top 10 list that I kind of did half as a joke. You missed it. That I kind of did half as a joke.
Well, here's what I'll do. I'll go down to our most popular, which you guys can do on YouTube. Let me pull this down here. I'm terrible at screen capping. Oh no, I'm failing. Okay, yeah, most popular, and look at this video that Dom got us.
Almost 300. Almost 300 reviews. I did that video half joking. I did that video half joking. But anyways, people, seriously, go give us a like, give us a subscribe, click the bell, that way you get notified for all new content.
It means a lot, guys.
And as always, people, at the end of the day, it's only about one thing and one thing only. Watch more fucking movies and TV.